Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Soul Focused Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman, and today I'm joined by one of our newer facilitators. This is Anuar Velazquez. How you doing, Anwar?
I'm doing well, Martin. I'm doing well. Happy to be here and looking forward to this.
Awesome. Give our listeners a little snapshot of where you are right now and what's happening there. Is it snowy and wintry, or what's going on?
So I'm in the Midwest. I'm in Noblesville, Indiana. Actually, a lot of our snow is melting now. Last week we had a pretty bad winter storm that came in, and we had about
Yeah.
six to seven, maybe 8 inches of snow here. But the sun is shining and it's beautiful here. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I know this has been a rough winter for all my folks. I'm originally from Cleveland and was living in Pittsburgh up until just a few months ago. Spent a lot of time in Indiana training for multiple organizations. So I miss the winter a little bit, Anwar. I also miss it less than I thought I would. I'm kind of enjoying life here in Florida. I'm not gonna lie. And, our listeners are learning that about me. I'm learning to like Florida, Anwar. I'm learning to like it here. So let's jump into just talking about who you are, what you are. As our listeners know, I always like to kind of frame. I learned this from my DRCO that who we are and what we are really not the same thing. So I always like to kind of get both questions down. So however you want to start, who you are, what you are, whatever you want to say, Anwar, just to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the what I am, right? I'm a son of two immigrant parents. My parents and I and my family immigrated here to United States from Mexico, from a town right off of the border of Brownsville, Texas. We moved here when I was 13 years old, and we moved to South Bend, Indiana. A lot colder than here, right? You talk about the cold and the cold weather. It's a lot colder than here in Owensville, Indiana.
Yes.
So I don't miss it. I'm actually, at some point in my life, I want to end up somewhere south. I'm hot blooded. I want to be where the sun is, right? That's where I get my vitamin D and I feel better, right? So yeah, I didn't speak English language when I first moved here, so I had to learn that.
Mhm.
I went to school here, started seventh grade, went on to high school, was a 21st century scholar and a upward bound student at Notre Dame.
Mhm.
So then I had the opportunity and the privilege to go to college at Indiana University for free. So I attended Indiana University from 2009 to 2013. I studied criminal justice and minor in Spanish. That was easy. That one was a given for me. And then I went on to become a police officer. I was a police officer for approximately close to 10 years. I graduated academy in 2011. So this year would have been my 10th year as a police officer. And yeah.
Okay, we can get into that a little bit more over the course of this podcast. And the next one. First thing I have to do though is I don't think we've ever connected around the upward bound piece, have we? I was an upward bound counselor for 13 years at the city of Seattle Upward Bound program. We never talked about that, did we?
No, we've never talked about it. I've heard you mention it during some of our trainings and other stuff like that. But no, I mean, as soon as you said it, I knew we would connect about it. I loved it, man. Upper Bound was really the place that showed me the opportunities and the things that I was able to accomplish. Otherwise, honestly, I think I would have been failed by the educational system, right?
Right.
I got into a lot of trouble when I was in middle school. My parents had plenty of meetings with staff members at the schools because I was just an angry kid. I didn't want to be here. I wanted to be back in Mexico. So Upward Bound was really a place that I feel like they opened my eyes to the opportunities and the things that I could accomplish as a young kid, as a young kid of color, for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's really a great program in many ways. Looking back at it through the lens that I have now, there's so many things I wish we could have done differently. I think it could have even been better. And, I don't know what it was like for your program, but one of the things I struggle with when I look back on it is we only served 11 students at each school. And these are pretty large high schools in Seattle. And we only were serving 11 per school, only 65 in our whole program. And there was hundreds at each school that could have been in the program. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess I love the program, and I know so many stories, and I still have friends now that were my Upward Bound students, and a lot of them came to work for us after they graduated as teaching assistants. And, one of them, a good friend now, Willie Seals, he actually, took my job over time. He became a counselor with that program. So I think it's an incredible program. And I also think, given the lens that we have now, I can see how it could even be better.
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. To be honest with you, that's something that I struggled with for a while there when I was part of it. And then I move on to go to college. I would ask myself a lot the
Yeah.
question of why me, right? Because I had plenty of friends that were brilliant. Some of them dropped out of high school, and that was unfortunate. They had to go and get jobs at factories and stuff like that. But I knew that they had the potential, that opportunity wasn't presented to them. So I can see where you're coming from there,
Yeah.
where there's a vast number of students that would benefit from a program like that.
Yeah, no, totally. And that is a lot of what I would think about. I think about everything now through the lens of, what we talk about with Soul Focus Group, and just how powerful a program could have, Upward Bound could have been if we could have reached more people and talked to the students about realizing their own power and becoming their full and authentic selves. And, the program I was in, we had a strong emphasis on institutional, systemic, and structural racism because I was a part of it, and that's also what I was doing a lot of. I experienced a lot of Upward Bound programs around the country that didn't talk like overtly about race and racism, and I think that's another way it could be an even better program is to really talk to kids, like give them that real story about race and racism in the United States.
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, so being part of that program, it also created a family outside of my family, right? I mean, at the time, my dad was working long hours. My mom had a lot of things going on, so and that's what I loved about the motto of Upward Bound is you have another family outside of your own family, and so I was an Upward Bound student. My brother was an Upward Bound student. My sister, and now my youngest sister, who's 15, she was accepted into the program. So that's awesome to hear how that family
Mm.
view is sticking throughout my whole family as a whole.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And there's no question that family aspect of it was really powerful. One of the things that I learned early on in my role as a counselor is, I would go and sit in people's homes. And, this was a Seattle area. So we had Black folks, we had Latino folks, we had, every kind of Asian and Pacific Islander that you could ever imagine, Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodian, Thai, Mien. I mean, just, groups of people, Samoan, Tongan, groups of people, ethnicities, and that I'd never learned about growing up in a place like Cleveland, where everything was pretty much black and white. And there was such a consistent message that I would get when I would sit in people's homes and we would do the initial interview. And basically, what they'd all say is like, I want you to act like you think I would act with my child. And they gave me permission essentially to be that surrogate parent when they weren't around. And as a white dude, I was so fortunate to be learning about, institutional, systemic, and structural racism and how I'd internalized it. And I was so fortunate to be learning that at the same time because pretty much everybody were kids of color. And it really gave me just a whole new glimpse on what those relationships could be with, what the parents wanted from us. A lot of white adults working in positions of authority with teenagers and stuff think that they should be friends. And, while I got along really well with my students, I learned from the families that they didn't want their kids to have a friend. They wanted their kids to have this surrogate parent when they weren't around. And that was a very powerful lesson for me. Very powerful.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I look at my culture, right, when I think about the Latino Hispanic culture here in the United States, especially those that come from an immigrant background, right? They're coming into a system that they have no idea what it's like, right? I mean, the American educational system was a lot different than the Mexican educational system where I came from. So my parents really had to trust those adults in the institution to fully take care of us. So at times they were not as connected as they would have been when we were living in Mexico, right? So
Right.
if educators aren't taking or are not acknowledging that through some cultural competency, then they're gonna fail those kids because at times I would hear stuff like, well, no, like those parents don't care about their education; they just want to work. Well, no, that's not the reality. Is I can ask 100 kids that come, or 100 parents whose parents are immigrants, and they're all going to tell you that they want an education. Now, at times,
Right.
unfortunately, they have to be at work. They have to work 2 jobs and stuff like that. So it's important for those educators to acknowledge those pieces so they can create better outcomes and results for those students.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'll say one thing I learned too is that was definitely true of immigrant parents, but I would say that was true of every parent.
Hmm.
People whose families have been here for generations and generations.
Hmm.
I would interview sometimes with parents who were like in active addictions, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, parents who were in danger of losing their children off of CPS, and it was always consistent. Like everybody just wanted their child to have a better life. Everyone wanted their child to be successful,
Hmm.
and it's something that I still hold with me today is the lessons I learned when I sat in people's homes and just listened to what they said about their children,
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. No doubt.
Well, you never know where a soul focused radio podcast is going to take you on. I had no idea that we were going to spend 10 minutes on Upward Bound, but it's awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely, gives me a warm feeling thinking about all those experiences. And like I said, too, also knowing that, as we're really in the business of creating now, we can create new and better versions of everything. That's
Hmm.
the spirit that we hold at Soul Focus Group. So if I were to ask you the question, who are you? Now that we've heard some of the what, how would you answer the question, who are you? Who is Anuar Velazquez?
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, it's a deep question, right? I think that human beings or people overall, we don't think about that question often. And
That's right.
by doing that, we are we're not being our full selves. We're not bringing our full potential into the table, into the inside of a police vehicle, the inside of an office at a school, right? But for me, when I think of that, and I started thinking more about that as I started getting older and I started going through my life, right? But I will say that if I were to answer that in one single word, is I'm caring, right? I care about people deeply. I care about social justice. I'm empathetic. I'm able to apply that empathy to connect with people. But overall, I'm a very caring human being. I'm curious. I recently wrote something, and I'm not a writer, but I've been getting into it a little bit more to express my feelings, right? And I wrote something
Right.
how the educational system turned me into something that I'm not, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm a person that is curious. I'm a person that questions things. I'm a person that on there I wrote that I want to howl at the moon without being criticized or being called a savage, right? And I want to express myself the way I see
Mhm.
myself, right? But unfortunately, going through the educational system, being told where to sit down, when to speak, when not to speak, being criticized and corrected for my accent at times, it did a lot. It really did. But I'm finally through this work, through Soul Focus Group, I've been able to really express myself in ways that I've never had before in the past.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's almost like so much of what we have to do is unlearn, right? Like
Hmm.
we literally are in an unlearning process now.
Yeah, yeah.
You
No,
know,
when I think back on my whether there were work experiences, life experiences through my family or educational, I can think of so many things that I can pick out of that program that I downloaded from each one of those sections, and I just have to remove those, right? Because otherwise, they're not allowing
right,
me to be who I am and what I'm supposed to be.
right. And so, you know, the job that you had when you were a police officer, you worked in schools with a lot of young people, right?
Yeah, so that was later toward the end of my law enforcement career. I did that for about 2 to 3 years. Before that, I worked on the streets, but even then, I still engaged a lot with the community, with the youth community. So I still try to focus a lot on working with the youth when I worked on the road. Yeah.
Like, what was the overall approach? I want to talk to you about just the policing piece in general, but overall, what was your approach to youth, knowing the impact that the educational system had on you, and how you're just now really coming into your own, and as you say, unlearning. So, what was your approach to young people that you were working with and interacting with?
So my approach was more of a peace officer, right? I think so much we talk about law enforcement officers that we start applying such a heavy word to that we're only there to enforce the laws, right? When in reality, we're there to create connections through our jobs. And that was the approach that I took. I wanted to create a connection with the kid who maybe they downloaded the programming or they downloaded a message of police officers are bad through experiences or whatever it was. But I wanted to change that image through my connection with that kid, with that young man, with the young girl, whatever it was. I always did it like that. So in the summers when I worked in South Bend, I volunteered for the police athletic league, and I played. I was supposed to coach kids how to play tennis. I didn't know how to play tennis, but I was just out there swinging that racket, right? But it gave me an opportunity to create a human element behind the badge, right? So those kids could see me as a human being, could see me as somebody that likes to have fun, somebody that is there more than just
Right.
to arrest people, right? Because I mean, to be frank with you, growing up, I didn't really have good experiences with police officers. So
Hmm.
in my eyes, at times I questioned myself, like, dang, why did I become one, right? But I did it because I wanted to change that image. I wanted to work on bridging the gap and healing that those issues that have been created through law enforcement, right? Especially in communities of color
Right.
or lower socioeconomic status communities.
And so that was your motivation when you got into it. Because I know our Soul Focus Radio listeners, and I know we have people out there that are probably like police officer. Like
Hmm.
I know there's a lot of people that have downloaded for many reasons, and it's not just the people of color, and it's not just the people from low socioeconomic status, but it's also, I think there's a political idea now about the police in general, and I think there's a lot of people who feel, I mean, there's a defund the police movement. I'm sure there are people listening right now that have been part of the defund police movement, and I know they're curious. Like, I know you said it was to create an idea of policing, to represent something different, to have sort of a more pure, like, helping place. Tell us a little bit more why you, given your experiences, why you chose to be a police officer.
The first experience that I had with an American police officer was when we were actually traveling from Mexico to here, and we were pulled over by police officers in a southern state. I can't remember where exactly, but my mother was afraid. My dad, everybody in the vehicle, we were all afraid, right? And then they start going through our
Yeah.
luggage and going through all of our stuff. And now that I'm a police officer, I think about, well, why do they do that, right? But even then, I think about the impact that it had,
Right.
especially on a younger on a young self of me, right? I think about my sister, how afraid she was, and how we were introduced to that. So then we moved to South Bend, Indiana, and anytime a police officer got behind the vehicle of my mom or my mom's vehicle, or we were driving, she would say like, don't move," or like, "I'm gonna get arrested and I'm gonna get deported," or like she would freak out. So I started thinking like, like if I'm receiving these messages, who else is receiving them and why, right? I started questioning that image. So I thought a lot about, well, what can I do myself? Anything that I do, whether it's a hobby, whether it's work or mentorship, whatever I'm doing, I try to do it with the purpose, right? To try to leave some sort of footprint behind. And that's why I decided to go into law enforcement, because I wanted to connect those two pieces that have been disconnected for so long, right? Because by and large, yes, police officers are good police officers. However, at times, it was happening to me, Mark. I came in thinking
Yeah.
I was doing the best that I could without really analyzing my own implicit bias or my groundwater, and at time that was showing up without me being aware of it, right? Or actually even analyzing or looking at my own trauma from my childhood or work related trauma and how that came into effect when it was time to connect with the community, right? Because I would be
Right.
sitting here lying to you if I said, yeah, I was always the best. No, I was not always the best. I tried, right? I try to connect those communities through mentoring students, mentoring the youth, volunteering, creating the events for the Latinx community, anything like that. But every once in a while, my implicit would kick
Right.
in without me being aware. That's when it became more. at times I feel like that left more of an impact behind, again, without me being intentional about it.
I think that's so powerful, Anwar, because so many people say that the only problem with policing would be like, quote unquote, a few bad apples, right? But as long as you have good people that are policing, you're not going to have, this disproportionate outcomes in criminal justice or police brutality or differential treatment based on race and class. A lot of people trace that to individual behavior, but you're saying like your intent 100% was not to be that person. And still, even with your experience coming over here as an immigrant child and essentially being traumatized, because the way you described that incident, that was a traumatic incident for you and your family. And there was like trauma that continued, right? And even with that experience, you still felt some of that implicit bias kind of sneak up on you, even with the intent to be the opposite of it.
Hmm. Yeah, even when I became a police officer, that trauma will show back up at times. I was pulled over twice as an adult, right? And during both of those
Yeah.
interactions, first of all, I'm not the type of person that likes to go to places and say, "Hey, I'm a police officer" or anything like that, right? So I get pulled over in both of those interactions, and you know, I could see it, and I can still see why at times people get irritated with police officers, or there's that anger, and those issues rise up, right? I mean, that during both of those interactions, me as a police officer, I was not treated as a human being, right? Until I said, "Hey, I'm a police officer." All of a sudden, my humanity was treated as such, right? It would make me question, like, man, what is going on here, right? So I think about that stuff a lot, where like, if we could all look at that, our own traumas, to try to consider finding that connection piece, finding that empathy, right? Empathy is something that we all lack, whether we like to admit it or not. We all lack that. We're not empathetic human beings, but if we go back to finding our true selves, then we would be able to realize how much of a connection we can make with somebody that either doesn't look like me, that doesn't speak the same language, or even somebody that looks like me that may think differently than I do, right?
That's right. I would say that all of us are born incredibly empathetic. I would say,
Mhm.
and I hear you saying that too, that all of us are born, we're all incredibly empathetic beings. And then this world, in many ways, has sort of, I would say, beaten, for some folks, definitely beaten the empathy out, but
Mhm.
programmed the empathy out of us, because empathy does not serve, the egoic purpose of the people that are profiting off of us as human beings. Like the more empathetic we are, the less divided we are. The more empathetic we are, the less of the problems that we have right now we have. And in order to be empathetic, you have to be able to see yourself in the other people that you're dealing with. And what really stood out to me when you told the story of the two instances, and I've heard this, I've worked with lots of Black police officers too, doing different kinds of work. And I've heard multiple stories like this. But what was so interesting to me is that they didn't honor the who you were just as a person that was driving that got pulled over. But what they responded to was the what you were. When they found out that you were quote unquote like them, but the like them wasn't your humanity. The like them was your job. And I'm really sitting with that right now. That's kind of a trip. And it really shows a flaw in the way we do policing right now.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. So, like, one of the incidents, I was actually in Texas, right, and I was going to take the polygraph for Texas State Trooper, and I didn't live there, so my uncle lets me drive his car, and I'm driving there, and I hit a border patrol checkpoint. So they put
Yeah.
me to the side, and they picked me. I roll the window down and everything, and they're like, "Hey, where are you coming from?" I'm coming from Brownsville, Texas, headed to McAllen, right? Okay, what are you heading to McAllen for? Well, I'm going to the Texas Department of Public Safety. You know what's crazy is they try to lie to me. They're like, they're not open on Mondays. Well, my polygraph test
Wow.
is Monday, and I have an email from the person, right? What's going on here, right? Then they start
Right.
questioning you, like, well, where's your driver's license? Well, my driver's license is from Indiana. So then they're like, well, you're from Indiana. You have a vehicle from Brownsville, Texas. Now you're headed to McAllen. Where were you born? Where have you lived in the past? Have you lived in Mexico? Yeah, I lived in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. You know, well, if you know a little bit about that city, it's actually pretty drug ridden, right? So automatically they try to connect it to that. well, like, oh, so you're from Matamoros, like
Wow.
they start questioning more. Then they get a canine dog. The dog doesn't do anything, but they get me out of the car, and I was like, just so you know, my badge is in the car, and they're like, your badge, and I was like, yeah, I'm a police officer. Oh, why didn't you tell us that? Why would that make a difference, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what if I was a police officer transporting drugs somewhere? That would let me. You're saying that would let me go scotch free, right? If I was to say, hey, I'm a police officer, can I go through, right? It was unbelievable to
That's
me,
right.
but it was more painful because I started thinking about like how many people does that happen to them that may not be police officers, and they get treated. They're not given that chance of, well, why didn't you tell us that, right? They're not able to use something like that for their advantage in a way to show their humanity.
Yeah. I mean, that's wild, to me, right? I'm really sitting with that right now because, you know, we talk about it. So focus group, we talk about the vampire effect. And part of the vampire effect is that, vampires don't see their reflection. And we say that we see ourselves reflected in other human beings. And I'm just thinking about how different the criminal justice system would be if part of the training was to make sure that you're always seeing the humanity in anybody that you're dealing with. If you're pulling them over, if you're showing up, for a domestic violence complaint or anything that is happening, that your focus is on this human being that you're about to interact with. And it sounds like in your experience from both sides of the badge, if you will. I know it's kind of like a dramatic both sides of the badge type of thing, but you have been on both sides of the badge, and it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like your experience is that that's problematic. That there isn't people aren't seeing the humanity. Police officers aren't seeing the humanity in the people that they're interacting with.
No, not at all. When I think about the training that I had as a police officer, I can tell you the thing that I spent the most hours training on was defense tactics, right? Physical defense tactics and shooting drills. I can't tell you that I had a class that actually dealt with dealing with human beings, right? Overall, the law enforcement
Right,
field and the law enforcement career, that's a customer service driven field, right? You're dealing with people, and those people can at any point
right,
complain on you or whatever it is, right? But why are we not
right,
training officers as such? Why are we not training officers to know how to deal with people? That's where I think there's a lack. So, you hear a lot about the defended or defunded police and stuff like that. And unfortunately, like
yeah,
that Obama article talked about, they give big power to that phrase that it loses its meaning instead of finding something that's more solution
mhm,
focused. So
right,
I think police officers want to be good police officers, no doubt. But if they don't have the right tools, then how can they apply empathy on their jobs? Especially when you talk about police officers that have seen so much trauma in their work, at some point you start to become jaded, you start to become hopeless that there's any change in the community. When I became a
right,
police officer, I had a detective that asked me why I wanted to become a police officer. And before I could even answer the question, he says, don't bullshit me and tell me that you want to help out the community because you're not going to do that in this field, right?
wow,
This is an older police officer. So what has this officer dealt with throughout his whole time? Because I'm sure he came in with maybe similar thoughts, right? But something happened along that way where he was not seeing any change and instead possibly was creating more damage because of how complacent he was becoming with his job. So that really hit me. It really did. I'm like, dang, I was just about to answer that I became a police officer to help out the community, but I guess I won't be
right,
doing that, you know.
wow. What did you say? Do you remember?
I ended up saying that. I'm like, well, actually, I'm doing this to help out the community.
Yeah,
I ended
said
up
it
saying,
anyways.
yeah, I said it anyways, because that's what I wanted to do. That is truly what I wanted to do. Again, I wanted to be that officer that you hear of that gets out of their car and walks the beat, right? That goes to businesses,
Right,
that gets to know the families that live in that beat. I took a lot of beat pride in the beat that I was assigned. I wanted people to know me who I was as a person, not just as a police officer. I
Right.
wanted to make those relationships, those more authentic and genuine relationships. Otherwise, I would just get to see him during a traffic stop and then go on my merry way or arrest somebody and then leave. Right? That ain't gonna change nothing.
Right. Yeah, that's powerful. We're gonna wrap up this first podcast, and we're gonna pick up this conversation because I think this is a fascinating conversation about the difference between the individual's intent and then
Hmm.
the impact that the policing institution and system, the criminal justice system, just that gap between intent and impact. We've been talking about it a lot on this first podcast. I want to go a little bit deeper into it, and also I think it would be, if you're open to sharing, I think it would be fascinating for our listeners to also hear a little bit more about what your journey, to immigrate to the United States was like.
Hmm.
Why did your family choose to do it? What was it like? You already talked to us a little bit about that harrowing experience with police officers in a southern state. And then also, how did you end up in South Bend of all places? So I really want to, pick up this conversation on the other side of us taking a little break. And we'll pick up part two of your conversation. How's that sound?
That sounds wonderful. Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you, Anwar. And to all of our listeners, we thank you as always for listening. To me, this has been a fascinating story, and I'm excited to have part two of it. Hope that you're enjoying it. Know that we care about you. We love each and every one of you. We love that you come on this journey with us. We love that you're interested and excited to get to know all of the people that are currently facilitating and working with the Soul Focus Group. I love doing these particular podcasts to help introduce folks, to you. As we know that you're very interested in what we do, we want you to go to soulfocusedgroup.com. We want you to check out all of our podcasts on the Apple platform, Spotify, and coming soon to Amazon podcasts. And also check us out on YouTube, soulfocusedgroup.com, Soul Focus Radio on YouTube as well. We want you to stay safe. We want you to stay well. We'll talk to you again next week. And most of all, we want you to stay soul focused.
If you wish to support and represent the Soul Focus Group, check out our apparel store at our website, www.soulfocusgroup.com/shop.